Buongiorno a tutti, grazie di essere qui. Diamo un caldissimo benvenuto a Tilda Swinton. Ieri ci ha affascinato, ci ha entusiasmato con il suo discorso nell'accettare il Leone d'Oro alla carriera. È stato un discorso bellissimo, pieno di speranza, pieno di passione. Quindi grazie per le sue parole. Io non vorrei spendere troppo tempo nel presentare la straordinaria carriera di questa attrice, perché appunto la sua carriera parla da sola. Volevo solo ricordarvi che qui a Venezia ha vinto una Coppa Volpi nel 92 con Edoardo II di Derek Jarman, e poi è tornata in giuria nel 1998. Ha più volte ricordato che all'epoca i suoi bambini erano piccoli, forse hanno cominciato a camminare sulla spiaggia del Lido. E poi l'ultima volta l'abbiamo vista qui a Venezia con Suspiria di Luca Guadagnino, e quest'anno appunto il Leone d'Oro alla carriera, The Lion with Wings, come ha detto ieri sera. E quindi io vorrei cominciare questa chiacchierata con lei, alla quale naturalmente siete invitati a partecipare, con una prima domanda molto, molto banale, visto che ha più volte detto delle cose meravigliose sul Festival di Venezia. Qual è il suo rapporto con i festival? Quando la invitano a un festival come attrice o come giurata, ecco, qual è la sua prima reazione?
Hello? Oh.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. Festivals. They are, I would say they are everything for me, but that's not entirely true, but they are the root of my transport into cinema in many ways. I mean, as a filmmaker, I was always besotted with cinema, as I still am, as a fan, as a nerd, as a geek. But when I went with my first film, look at my T-shirt. This is an original Caravaggio T-shirt, by the way.
Oh,
from 19... I keep everything. When I went with Caravaggio with Derek Jarman to Berlin in 1986, it was like a supersonic jet for me, because I saw international cinema in a way that I hadn't before. I was very young. I was brought up in Scotland in a relatively, there weren't many cinemas, put it that way. And I had a taste for cinema, but I had very little experience. And when I went to Berlin and I saw the carpet of international film, and what's more important, I met international filmmakers, then that was it. I mean, so a film festival has always been very seriously a portal for me, and I have honored and loved and worked on film festivals my whole life, and will continue to do so, because I know how very often they are the first and only portal for people to see cinema. And in a way, I would say even more now, when it's possible to learn to love international film through our revered streaming services and through video in the old days and through DVD. But now, you know, if we neglect film festivals, then we will neglect the big screen. And we must really remember how incredibly important they are. Just the experience of going to a film that you've never heard of before, by filmmakers you've never heard of before, from a country you've never heard the language spoken, it's an existential privilege, and the more people that can have this opportunity, the better. And the film festivals that I love the most are the film festivals that are really owned by the people of that particular place. It's only the force is with us with the film festivals.
Mm-hmm. E nella sua carriera è spesso fedele ad alcuni registi, è stata fedele ed è fedele ad alcuni registi, ma sarebbe veramente riduttivo, credo, definirla la musa di questi registi. Lei è stata molto di più, è stata coautrice dei suoi ruoli e tra voi c'è stata una reale collaborazione molto, molto complessa e profonda. Quindi vorrei, prima lei citava Jarman, vorrei che ci raccontasse proprio come è iniziato questo sodalizio artistico con Derek Jarman e come sono stati quegli 8 anni in cui avete lavorato insieme.
Well, I've said before, and I will repeat it because it's true, if I hadn't met Derek Jarman, I think there is no question I would not be making films as a filmmaker in the way in which I now work and live, because what I found with him was a way of working that I thought at the time was completely unique, that it was like lightning striking once. The miracle of my life has been that the lightning has struck again and again. And what I mean by this way of working is Derek was an artist, he was a painter, first and foremost, and he knew what it was to work alone as an author of his painting. But he also knew, when he made his work as a filmmaker, that he was working in a group with other filmmakers. And so from the very beginning, and when we made Caravaggio, I was on the verge. I knew that I didn't want to be an actor, for sure. So that was clear. And I was thinking that it was impossible to work in cinema, with which I was besotted. It was 1985. It didn't really feel like there was a cinema, because I was, of course, looking for the cinema of Antonioni and Rossellini and Werner Schröter and Fassbinder, and it didn't feel as if it existed in London. I was about to just forget any idea of being a performer. When I met Derek, he opened to me the possibility of not only making that sensibility of work, but also in the same way, in this collective way. I don't know how else to work. And what he did was, I mean, in many ways, I think if he was sitting here, and he kind of is, he would say it was because he was lazy. He just threw a party, which was the film, and said, so you're doing the costumes, you take responsibility for that, and you're going to be doing the sound, so you take responsibility, and you're going to be playing Caravaggio, so you take responsibility for that. And then he just sort of coordinated the party and arranged the food. And that was an amazing apprenticeship for me and for Sandy Powell, the great Sandy Powell, who was the costume designer, who was straight out of art school. I think that was her first gig when she came out of art school, was to work with Derek Jarman on Caravaggio. He gave us responsibility. In a sense, he gave us shared authorship. And that's what I knew, and that's what I know. So the twin facts of not considering myself, seriously not considering myself, and never setting out to be an actor, and only knowing how to work in collaboration, he set the tone. And if I hadn't worked with him, I don't know how to work industrially, you know? My sense is that there is a way of working which professionals, you know, revered professionals use, which is quite fragmented, you know. You are playing a part, you will learn your lines and sort of work it out in the trailer, and then you'll kind of roll onto the set and do it. And you'll work out the design, and then you'll kind of, you know, produce that on the day. Well, that's not the way I know how to work. Everything is about the conversation. And the great blessing of my life is not only to have met Derek and worked alongside him and lived alongside him for 8 years and something like 7 films, but to have found it again with Bong Joon-ho, with Wes Anderson, with Joanna Hogg, with Luca Guadagnino. It's a huge, huge blessing.
Mm-hmm. E con Luca Guadagnino si è ricreato in qualche modo Con Luca Guadagnino si è ricreato in qualche modo questo sodalizio, cioè è un altro regista con il quale esiste una conversazione continua, no? Film dopo film. Ci può raccontare qualcosa sul modo che ha di lavorare con lui?
It's not really a question of recreation, it's a question of a shared sensibility and I mean, here's a slight red herring, but I think it will explain it quite easily. This extraordinary honor that I've been bestowed here in Venice, which I can't even discuss because it's too moving. It's been variously described as a career achievement or something, or a lifetime achievement. For me, career is not a word I recognize. I recognize a life, and I always set out to have a life, and I've had and I'm having a life. I'm really not interested in having a career. I don't even know what it is. The only thing I sense is when people talk about career, it sounds as if they're talking about something separate from their life. And my great privilege has been to develop my work and life in one gesture with these people, with Derek Jarman, with Luca Guadagnino, with Wes Anderson, with Jim Jarmusch, with Bong Joon-ho. These are my friends. They are my close friends. We cook together, we eat together, we have the most ridiculous jokes together, and we're growing up together. And so, in long answer to your question, Luca, who I met just after Derek Jarman died, it wasn't like I even imagined it was possible to, as you say, recreate, or even find any kind of match for what I had with Derek. But he was another brother. And so on the basis of that brotherhood, our work developed. But the brotherhood came first, and the brotherhood always comes first. And it's out of the brotherhood that the films come, because we will all be talking about, and then slowly the idea of a film that somehow comes out of that conversation will get born. But the conversation comes first.
Lei ha giustamente...
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot for a second.
Giustamente lei ricordava che il modo in cui lavora è quello di non separare i ruoli nel cinema, si collabora tutti, insomma, quello che diceva prima, ma lei nel suo percorso, nella sua vita, ha spesso affiancato il cinema, sì, ha spesso affiancato il cinema più radicale, più di ricerca, più sperimentale, più d'autore, con un cinema più mainstream. E questa è un'altra straordinaria abilità, perché non è semplice. Allora com'è possibile, è riuscita anche nel cinema più mainstream a tenere fede, diciamo, al suo metodo di lavoro e al modo in cui intende l'arte e il ruolo del performer?
Well, the first thing I want to say, whenever the word mainstream is used, I want to remind us that there is not only one mainstream. You know, one man's mainstream is another man's, dirty little brook. And it never occurred to me to be a snob or to be exclusive about cinema, because as far as I'm concerned, cinema is the gesture of inclusivity that we have. It's more than, art, of course, but within art, I would say, truly, it is the most humane and the pinnacle of inclusive gesture. And so it never occurred to me that I started working with experimental film and that one day I would jump ship and start making mainstream films. In fact, to be honest with you, I never went anywhere. The bigger budget, because let's face it, we're kind of talking about money, I think. The bigger budget projects came to me. I never went anywhere. The mountain came to Muhammad for me. But the interesting thing is that I noticed that when bigger budget studio films with which I've always, as a film nut, been completely fascinated. I mean, I mentioned Fassbinder and Werner Schröter, but, you know, George Cukor or William Wyler or John Ford or, you know, these are my gods also. So the idea, Alfred Hitchcock, you know, Michael Powell, these are the idea and the fascination with the power of this big studio film is also an experiment. And the interesting thing is that when the first studio films came to me, I noticed they were all experiments. The first one was really, Francis Lawrence asked me to be in Constantine with Keanu Reeves, which was hugely experimental. I mean, the special effects and the way in which the atmosphere of that fantasy was generated in the camera at that time was cutting edge beyond. And he knew it, and I knew it. And there was something about his invitation that was the invitation to an experiment. So that was easy. And also I loved his work, and I also loved Keanu. So easy, easy, easy. And I got to play the angel Gabriel with fuck off wings. So that was very easy. And then I think the next was possibly, I don't know, someone else could maybe correct me, but I think maybe the next moment was when Andrew Adamson came to me and asked me to be in the first Narnia film, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. For him, that was a massive experiment. He was an animator. He'd only made animated films, and he wanted to make his first live-action feature. And the way in which he asked me was really like a first-time filmmaker asking for a fellow traveler to come on this very risky venture with him. I mean, that was, you know, that's my carrot. That's what gets me. So the sense of experiment is almost, I would say, pretty much essential. And so it's not a question of budget. It's not a question of streams. That's the thing that I'm interested in. And also a filmmaker who I really like, who I want to hang out with, and who wants to work in this conversational way.
E oggi le cose stanno probabilmente cambiando, però fino a non molto tempo fa il percorso artistico di una, non userò mai più la parola carriera, il percorso artistico di un'attrice spesso cominciava a, come dire, declinare intorno ai 40 anni. Lei dopo i 40 anni ha fatto alcune delle cose più interessanti. Esatto. E quindi lei pensa che sia, diciamo, un privilegio ancora riservato a poche, o le cose stanno effettivamente cambiando anche a Hollywood?
Well, I mean, for me, Hollywood is Greta Garbo, and Greta Garbo gave up at 36. So, but she gave up for a very interesting reason. She said, I've made enough faces. And she was really frustrated and disappointed with the work that was, the opportunities that were being offered her. She was bored. And I really sympathize with her. If I was that bored and frustrated, I have a great garden and I'm happy there. You know, there's no reason for me to go on making films other than the fact that I have these conversations with these fellows. That's what draws me on. And every single film I've ever made, I intended to be my last film. Every single one. This I intended to be my only film. I always had a great love of one appearance and then over. Like, as you maybe have read, my favorite performance is the donkey in O Hazar Balthazar. You know, you can't top it. And so I'm always, I'm not following anything. I'm just going back to my garden, and then somebody will tempt me out with a conversation. So I'm not a great, I don't really, it's like I either haven't got enough brain cells or I have one too many that I simply don't understand why an age would be a cut-off point for anything. I don't really understand why it would. I mean, I draw a blank on the divisions of age or gender or any sense of identity, really. So, no, for me, but you were saying that your idea is that things become more interesting after a certain age?
No, I said that sometimes can be very difficult after.
Oh, be very difficult. Yeah, in some streams. In some streams, for sure. But if you're feeling the pinch of other people's priorities, my suggestion is jump ship. You know, find fellow travelers who have the same urges and the same passions and the same curiosities as you do. And yeah, don't stay where you're feeling blocked. It's easy to move sideways, move underground. That's it.
Prima di aprire, sì, vi lascio subito la parola, volevo chiederle quali sono i primi ricordi da spettatrice?
Memories? Well, great, okay. It's so funny because I was thinking, and I was looking at the list of the recipients of the Lifetime Achievement Award at Venice. I noticed that the last two recipients are Pedro Almodovar, who I am now a collaborator with, and I'm so proud of that. We made a film last month, and it's showing today. So he's my most recent love. And Julie Andrews was, in many ways, my first, because I think when I went to the cinema for the first time, I saw The Sound of Music, and in those days, it's like the early 13th century, we used to get these programs. We went at Christmas, and I think it's a tradition that I would love to see revived. You would get these beautiful, beautiful programs with photographs, and I remember getting this program and keeping it under my pillow for months. I mean, right through the summer, you know, Christmas program, all the way through the year, with photographs of Julie Andrews. So I think that was maybe my first experience of the big screen. But the first film I ever saw is a really interesting one, because for many years I thought it was a dream. And I saw it I must have seen it on television, but it's a truly cinematic experience. And only a few years ago did I discover that it was a film that existed. Somebody, I mean, all my life I've been saying, have you seen this film? So, no, okay, maybe it was. Finally, somebody told me, yeah, that is Powers of 10 by Charles and Ray Eames. You can get it on YouTube. It's something like 6-7 minute film. And it was a film that they made for NASA, I think, or I can't remember, some space program. And it's a science film where you start above a couple on a picnic blanket, and you come out and you see that they're beside a lake. You come out, you see that it's one of the Great Lakes. You come out, you see America. You come out, you see the planet Earth. You go out, 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 out. 10, 10, 10, 10, 10 multiplications through the Milky Way, and then you come back in, ding, 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 the planet, America, Great Lakes, the couple. You go down onto her hand, you go into her skin, you go through her cells, you go into her blood, you go into the atom. It's the most primal cinematic experience to see when you are 8. And I know that it was when I was 8, because I remember very well that I was 8. And when Mark Cousins and I created our foundation for children, the 8.5 Foundation, which is an initiative that we began a few years ago to introduce children across the planet to international cinema and cinema with subtitles and cinema from the 30s, 40s, 50s, or whatever, all through the last 12 decades of cinema. That is a film that I put on the menu, and I love to show it to 8.5-year-olds because it will blow your mind and it will set your perspective for the capacity of cinema and one's inner camera, one's inner eye, to be able to be that, as I keep saying, elastic. That's what cinema can do. So if you discover that when you're 8, then you're set, you're a film nut.
Allora, cominciamo con le domande, ce n'è una lì.
Good morning, Mrs. Swinton. I'm Alessandra De Tommasi from Vogue Italy. I'd like to ask you, it seems that you can do it all, and you are not afraid of taking yourself not too serious. I mean, you have done Trainwreck, that's very funny and very amazing at the same time. Anyway, what I would like to ask you is, what's the biggest, the more fearless thing that you have done in your life, let's say, career, artistic journey?
Fearless.
Fearless, yes.
Wow, that's a good question, Alessandra. Fearless. You see, this very strange word, because fearless means it's easy, like super easy. If you mean doing something that I was afraid of, like overcoming fear, honestly, every time I go out in public is a step for me, because I am a shy person. This situation is very comfortable for me because we're having a conversation, and because I can see your eyes, and because I knew that you were going to be able to talk back with me, and we were going to be able to discuss. So this is cool. This is happy for me. But I'm a shy individual, and yeah, standing on a stage like last night is less easy. So the fact that I even did it is amazing to me. So that's not fearless, but, acting as if, as they say.
C'è una domanda lì.
Sì, buongiorno. Andrea Giordano per Icon.it. Una domanda, una curiosità per quanto riguarda un progetto che ho letto, forse da regista, che riguarda il tema dell'educazione nelle scuole. Volevo sapere se era confermato, visto che è prodotto anche da Derek Yarman Lab, e se può magari raccontare se è vero, se è confermato questo documentario su questo tema, e che cosa la passione, delle nuove generazioni, che rapporto ha con le nuove generazioni. Grazie molto.
So it is true that for many years I was very involved in a school in the north of Scotland that my children went to. It was originally a Steiner school, a Rudolf Steiner school, and it stopped at 15. And very simply, when my children were reaching that age, I realized that I knew enough about the education that they were getting there and the way in which it was supporting them. And I, myself and another parent, founded an upper school. So we actually ran a school that in the north of Scotland, which went from kindergarten until 19, in fact. And the children at that school, including my children, did no exams. It was immersive learning, very often outdoor learning, and very much child-led. I'm no longer attached to that school. It's something that was really a very big part of my life for many years, and I stepped away at a certain point. But I was very proud and inspired to work with that school for so long. There is a film that I'm working on, but it's not exactly a documentary. It's an essay film about learning, about the nature of learning. And I have to confess to you, my collaborators and my collaborators are the Derek Jarman Lab, with whom I made the film The Seasons in Cassie about our friend John Berger, and also a film that I made about Derek with Isaac Julian a few years ago. Both of those films they're portraits, they're more essay films than documentaries, so you can see sort of what to expect. But my collaborators and I have been talking about this learning project for a while, but of course this year there's an extra impetus to go even deeper, to think, because we realized that what we and many others have been thinking about so much and so intensely for the last few years, how to find an alternative childhood and an alternative respect for the learning experience for children, is now on everybody's lips quite correctly. You know, there's been a disruption. And like all these disruptions, we must use it as an opportunity to think more deeply and more carefully, and to shake things up. So that essay film will come a little later than expected, because we're going back to the drawing board with it. But it's very interesting work, and we're talking to very, very inspiring people about educationalists and philosophers and thinkers about what our children need and what they will need, because all of us in this room, I'm not talking about us old people, I'm talking about people of 12 now or 10 now. What will their world be like in 20 years? What will they need? My quick answer is that they will need bent knees. They will need to be flexible. They will need to be self-sustaining, and they will need to be very relaxed. So we're working on this conversation about learning.
Una domanda lì, poi in fondo.
Hello, I have a question. Did being in Western Berlin in the 80s shape you as an artist, and where would you travel today if you want to grow as an artist?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. The question was about West Berlin in the 80s. Yes, I was remembering, Alessandra mentioned the fact that my children learned to walk. In fact, it wasn't on the beaches on the Lido. They learned to walk, my twins learned to walk in the corridors of the des Bains.
Okay.
It was very The Shining. It was a very cinematic start for them. And I was thinking yesterday about the des Bains and the fact that it doesn't exist anymore. And then I had this fantasy that in 10 years' time, we will come back with our sticks and our Zimmer frames, and it will be reopened. And I realized that this is what happens in life, that changes, right? That's the only thing we can rely upon. And the reason I mention it now, in answer to your question, is that the first time I went to Berlin in 1986 with Caravaggio, with Derek Jarman, my grandmother, who at that age at that moment was 86, said, "Oh, I love Berlin," and told me all these places to go. And when I got there, I realized that she told me all these places from the 20s, and they were all in the East. And now, of course, and I got to know that Berlin, I got to know the West Berlin. Even now, I haven't reconstructed it in my mind. The jigsaw doesn't completely work. I'm still stuck in that time a little bit. My time of being in Berlin with Christoph Schlingensief, with Cynthia Beat, with Heinz Emmigholz, with Daniel Schmidt, was really magical. And again, very, as part of my apprenticeship. Not apprenticeship, it's the wrong word because that sounds too serious. It was my formation as a filmmaker, because all of those filmmakers, they just encouraged what I was learning with Derek. They made me go, oh, Derek isn't the only one. Yeah, this is actually a world. This is a sensibility. This is a fellowship. And so it was enormously important. Of course, it helped that my other reference, apart from my sainted grandmother, was David Bowie and his Berlin experience. That was another battery in my machine. But I'm very, very fond of Berlin. I love it. But I would like to get to know what I call the new Berlin, because for me, my Berlin kind of ended in 1989.
C'era lì in fondo una domanda.
I think you asked me another question.
Silvia Nugara, Il Manifesto. I'm going to ask this question in English.
Thank you.
You have often gone beyond genders in your roles. One of the most iconic roles that you had was Orlando. I would like, talking about Berlin, Your comment about the decision of the Berlin Film Festival not to have a gendered award, so not for a woman and a man, but an ungendered role. Thank you.
Well, what a relief. How eminently sensible and, you know, good. I think the whole, you know, humans are, for some reason, really interested in division and compartmentalizing ourselves. And I think as we're really getting to understand now, this is not the way to go. In every sense, you know, dividing people up and prescribing a path for them, whether we're talking about gender or whether we're talking about race or whether we're talking about class. It's just such a waste of life, you know. Life is too short for all of this. And so I'm really happy to hear that about Berlin, and I think it's pretty much inevitable that everybody will follow, because it's just obvious to me. I mean, the whole idea of being fixed in any way it just makes me claustrophobic, and it just makes me sad. You know, just to call yourself definitively heterosexual, definitively homosexual, or definitively male, or definitively female, or I mean, it makes me want to go to sleep. Yeah, so bravo, Berlin. I think this gentleman here, I'm just feeling guilty because I think you asked me a second question that I didn't answer. You asked me one about Berlin, and then you asked me something else, and I forgot. And now
we
terrible
can,
thing is I can't hear you, sorry.
Because of, the Western Berlin of the 80s is long gone, where would you go today as an artist?
Okay, sorry, 1 second, yes. No, because of course, like everybody on the planet, we've all been dreaming of where we'd like to go. And I'll be very short and say everywhere. But at the same time, I will say this. There was a moment at the beginning of lockdown when my family and I were watching David Attenborough, Under the Sea. And I'm one of the very fortunate northerners who's had the opportunity in my life to go to coral reefs and swim underwater. And I remember watching this program and going, oh, how would I love to do that? And said to myself, maybe I will never do that again. And that's fine, because I have my memories, and this is an important point. I have lived long enough to have those memories, but more importantly, because more people haven't had the opportunity to swim in coral seas than have, we have David Attenborough, and we have Miyazaki. We have cinema to take us where we cannot go. And that's really, really important. And I don't mean it just in some kind of hypothetical, esoteric, philosophical sense, but practically, we can stay out of the air and we can go to the screen. And that's really important. And we may do it for a very long time. And that's got to be okay for us. We can't get frustrated about that. We can't just run to the airport when I would much rather people get a box set of David Attenborough or Miyazaki and watch Ponyo or, you know, The Deep Blue or whatever, and just be safe and inspired and stay out of those planes. That would probably be my suggestion.
Buongiorno. Lei prima ha parlato di David Bowie parlando di Berlino. Lei ha lavorato con Floria Sigismondi per The Stars, quindi volevo chiedere com'è stato l'approccio e l'esperienza in un video musicale, soprattutto in un video musicale di David Bowie.
Well, again, this is another great blessing in my life, through coming into cinema through art and with artists. I think when I counted within the first kind of 10 years of my working life as a filmmaker, I think like 80% of the directors I worked with were either first and foremost painters or first and foremost musicians. And so, and none of them had a relationship to the theatre, which is significant because I think that there is a world of cinema which is quite inspired by and related to the cinema. And that's not the cinema that I swim in. And so with Derek Jarman, always in between doing The Last of England or The Garden or War Requiem, we were making music videos with the Pet Shop Boys or Marianne Faithfull, and it was a wonderful, I mean, I mentioned the Francis Lawrence experience, and whenever I'm on a big experimental film, even the Marvel films, you know, the whole CGI experience, the standing in front of in the olden days it was a blue screen and now it's a green screen. It just reminds me of making Pet Shop Boys videos with Derek. I mean, that's also my route. And I had the great good fortune to work with wonderful musicians called Orbital. We made a great little film called The Box, and with David Bowie, Floria Sigismondi, of course. And yeah, it's interesting that you mention these short films, because I realize, particularly today, because we're just presenting the film that I made with Pedro, which is 30 minutes long, I'm very interested in short form films. And I suppose it's partly because of that beginning, working with these short films. Derek would use the short form films to work out a new experiment. There was a first time I went to Cannes, which was, I want to say something like, God, someone will correct me, it's something like 1989, maybe earlier, 1988. There was a compilation film called Aria, which was, I think 10 directors were asked to make like 3-minute videos of famous arias. And it was an extraordinary group of people: Jean-Luc Godard, Bruce Beresford, Nick Rogue, Ken Russell, etc., and Derek. And we made a little film from Charpentier's Louise, but it was really an experiment to see if we could blow Super 8 up to 35 millimeter. And it was because of that experiment that we felt encouraged to then make The Last of England and The Garden. So the short film is like a wonderful little lab opportunity, and I really love it.
Purtroppo dobbiamo fermarci qui perché fra un po' inizieranno le conferenze stampa, quindi grazie moltissimo a Tilda Swinton. Thank you very much. Thank you. Grazie a tutti voi, grazie.